So now let's go on to a slightly different topic. The second topic is really about monopoly. Okay, and you're going to ask me, well, why do we want to talk about monopoly? And in many ways, we're kind of now in the section of the book where we're going to begin to relax some of the assumptions of perfect competition. And the other extreme example of the extreme opposite of a perfectly competitive market is a monopoly. Okay, monopoly, not the game, but a market structure. Okay, so a monopoly is basically where you have just one single dominant firm that is producing for a particular market, basically. So it's an extreme example, and you guys say, well, how does this actually relate to the assumptions that you're relaxing? Well, if you think about it, if there's only one firm in the market, okay, that also suggests that there are entry barriers or even exit barriers as well. So effectively, oligopolies and monopolies form because there are barriers to entry and or exit. So this is where we're kind of then going to be talking a little bit about monopolies and oligopolies. And to be honest, monopolies is the other extreme, and it is also equally as difficult to find in real-world examples of monopolies. I mean, the best example I can probably think of is maybe De Beers, when they had like a 90% market share of the diamond market. That's the best example I can think of. But in any case, these are very, very important to study, because the first thing that you'll notice is because you're a monopolist, that also means that you effectively control the market. And what that also means is when you control the market, the demand that you face is also the demand of the market, right? Hence, effectively, you can set any price you want without actually losing the entire market. That's one of the key implications. You're no longer a price taker, you're a price maker, okay? So let's think a little bit more about this, and let's draw a couple of examples, okay, and what this actually all means. So with a monopoly, okay, you have P and you have Q, and then you have D, and you would then have a marginal cost, okay, and let's just assume that the marginal cost is just that, okay. So you're going to say, well, okay, this looks like a very familiar diagram somehow in the book. So let's think about, well, okay, we have demand, we have marginal cost. So where's the supply curve for the monopolist? Well, the truth of it is that he really doesn't have a supply curve. Remember, he can set any price he wants, right, without actually losing market. If he sets this price, this is the quantity that will be demanded. If he sets this price, this will then be the quantity demanded. If he sets this price, this is the quantity demanded. And of course, if he sets price equal to marginal cost, that will be then the quantity demanded. Okay? So effectively, you're going to say, well, okay, if he can set any price, well, what price would he set? Rationally, he would set the price where marginal revenue equals to marginal cost, because MR equals MC is always going to be the profit maximizing quantity that the monopolist should produce if his objective is to, of course, maximize profits. So what are we missing here? We've got the MC curve. So then where is this guy here? Where is the marginal revenue curve? And for you guys, you should probably be able to work out what marginal revenue means, right? It's basically the change in total revenue, okay? So let's just run through a very simple example here, and hopefully you will understand what marginal revenue actually is. So let's say price is equal to 5, corresponding quantity is equal to, let's say, 1, price equals to 4, and this is quantity, and that's equal to 2, P equals 3, and that's equal to 3, P equals 4, and that's equal to 1, P equals 5, so that's, sorry, I made a mistake. So that should be 2, 3, this should be 2, my bad. 4, and P equals 2, P equals to 2, and this is equal to 1, and that's equal to 5. Okay, let's just run through with this very, very simple example. Okay, my apologies for the mistake just then. So then what's total revenue? Total revenue is just simply P times Q. Okay, so that's equal to 5, and that's equal to 8, and that's equal to 9. This is equal to 8, and this is equal to 5. Okay, so marginal revenue, okay, obviously you're moving from 0 to 5, okay, and then so that's 5, so then that's 3, 1 minus 1, and here it is minus 3. Okay, so this is again marginal revenue where you're basically counting the incremental units. Okay, so obviously here it'll be 0 to 5, assuming that it's initially 0, and of course 5 to 8 is just 3 units, 8 to 9 is 1 unit, etc., etc., etc. So you could basically kind of graph this. And what would it actually look like? Well, if we want to kind of draw this, right, for a linear demand curve, what you'll always find, right, is that this is your demand. Let's say this is again your marginal cost. Okay, so this will then be your marginal revenue. Okay, and for a linear curve, this marginal revenue curve is always going to be twice the slope of the demand curve. Okay, so how do I see this? Okay, again, this is a little bit more for the mathematically orientated. Marginal revenue is basically the first order condition of total revenue. Okay, so just to again, for those that are mathematically oriented, if we have P is equal to 5 minus Q, which is this example here, okay, total revenue is simply 5 minus Q, that's your price, times Q. So total revenue is 5Q minus Q squared. Okay, so we take the first order condition, dTr dQ, and we get 5 minus 2Q. Okay, so you can immediately see, just from this simple example, that the marginal revenue curve is simply just twice the slope. Okay, so what can we then say? Okay, well, what we can then say is that, well, where is the profit maximizing point? Well, it's the point where MR equals to MC, which is here. And you're going to say, well, can we do more with it? And absolutely. This is going to be the price paid by consumers because that's their willingness to pay. Okay. And of course, right, you can then analyze, well, what is then the profit, isn't it? So total revenue is that bit there. Total cost is this area here. So therefore, this rectangle here represents profit. Okay, and of course, consumer surplus is here. Okay, so then you're going to say, well, what's this idea of a deadweight loss? Again, the idea of a deadweight loss is basically what would happen if we compare it to the perfectly competitive market. Well, in a perfectly competitive market, what is it? What's the condition? It's basically P is equal to MR is equal to MC. So in other words, P is equal to MR equals to MC, which suggests that this is actually the quantity that would then be produced, isn't it? Okay. And if that's the quantity that's going to be produced, but now this is produced, this effectively is the deadweight loss that has been created as a result of the monopolist. Okay. So that's one of the key things to remember, that when we're talking about the deadweight loss, we're comparing it to the perfectly competitive market. Okay. So you're going to say, okay, that's cool, but what else? What else can you tell me about monopolists? Well, because I'm a greedy monopolist, the question that always occurs to me is, well, can I actually make more money? Well, yes. And how do I do that? Well, think about it this way, right? In this particular scenario, if I wanted to sell additional units, I have to lower the price, isn't it? Right? So if I want to sell 2 units, I can't just simply charge one person 5 and then the second person 4, right? But what if I could do that? If I could do that, then of course I would make more money, wouldn't I? Right? Because my marginal cost is basically still constant. Okay. So this is the tricky thing. With the monopolist, unlike in perfect competition, if they want to sell additional units under this current condition, they have to lower the price to sell those additional units. In a perfectly competitive market, if they dared to lower their price, then of course they would effectively lose the entire market. This is not going to be the case here. So what if we revisit this particular scenario where we could actually charge different people different prices? Okay, so in other words, this consumer, let's say I'm going to charge him 5, this consumer I'm going to charge him 4, this consumer I'm going to charge him 3, this consumer I'm going to charge him 2, etc., etc., etc. I'm going to charge them exactly what they are willing to pay. So you can kind of imagine where this is going, right? This effectively would mean that all of this, seems that that light is playing up a little bit, will all be producer surplus now, isn't it? In other words, all of this will be extracted from the producers, from the consumers to the producers. They will charge them exactly, each consumer exactly what they're willing to pay. And anything above marginal cost, I can basically charge them the reservation price. And as long as it's above marginal cost, I make money. So in fact, the profit expands by that. Great. So this is another point which I'd like to make. Okay. The important thing here is note that this is actually an efficient outcome. That is, we are still out here, economic surplus is still maximized, okay? There's still no Pareto improving transaction that can be undertaken here. So it is actually technically efficient. Is it fair? Probably not, right? So this is where I want you guys to distinguish the difference between what is fair and what is efficient. So that is what we call first degree price discrimination. So first degree price discrimination. We also have second and third degree price discrimination. So So this is a very extreme form, and it very rarely actually happens in real life. Again, the closest example I can think about this type of discrimination is in the airline industry when you're booking for airfares, and they collect a vast amount of information about, for example, where you live, what trip you're planning to make, what time is your flight, you know, what class you want to be in, you know, and you know what type of trip you're kind of making, whether you're a tourist or a businessman. All of these information they collect, and then they try to undertake this type of price discrimination, and they're pretty good at it. But if we want to talk about price discrimination in its strictest sense, first degree that is, again, close, but I don't think it's exact. So with that in mind, given that this is a little bit unrealistic, the question then becomes, well, what other price discrimination could a monopolist undertake? Well, there's second and there's third degree. So third degree is a coarser form of first degree, because rather than looking at the exact willingness to pay, the question is, are there actually observable characteristics for which we can actually dissect the market? Like, for example, think about movie tickets, right? When you go to the movies, there's concession rates, and then there is just your full adult rate. You get the concession rate if you show your student card, for example, and you can identify yourself as a student, right? Same thing with public transport. When you get on the bus, right, and you apply for your Opal cards, you get, if you're a pensioner, you get the gold Opal card, and that immediately identifies you as a pensioner, right? So there's something that's observable for the monopolist to price discriminate on, okay? So that's third degree. Depending on the market and depending on the market structure, it is possible to get close to extract a lot of the surplus from the consumers. And we kind of make this example in the end, towards the end of that chapter. The second type, which is a little bit more subtle, is second degree price discrimination. And what that is think about the lack of information, right? So the example as given in the book is bulk discounts. The key thing to note about second degree price discrimination is that firms don't actually know what type of consumer you are, okay? So think about phone plans. When you go to the Telstra store or Optus store and walk in and say, I want this plan, right? When you actually walk in, they don't know what type of consumer you are, but they have menu pricing based on what they think the users are. And the moment that you self-select into that particular plan, you immediately identify who you are. But initially, a priori, they actually don't know what type of consumer you are, right? So that's the key difference between second and third. Second, they don't actually have any information about you, but for example, when you make the bulk purchase, they know what type of consumer you are, right? When you buy a certain quantity and it's considered bulk, that tells you what type of consumer you are. But a priori, before actually making that purchase or transacting with the supplier, they actually don't know who you are. With third degree, they know exactly who you are the moment you show your student card. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the three. And of course, in reality, there might be a mix of these things, right? In particular, second and third. So again, think about phone plans. If you're a student with Optus, if you identify yourself as a student, you immediately get 10% off, and then they have all the menus of plans. So that's almost a combination of second and third degree price discrimination, right? So the world is a very complex place, and again, don't get trapped into thinking that it has to fall into one of these categories in the real world. It could actually be a mix, and that's what makes economics and this topic really, really interesting. Hopefully you found this section useful, and in the next section we'll talk a little bit about something that's a little bit more realistic: oligopolies.